Hello and welcome. My name is Vladislav Novikov. My guest today is Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and local elected official in the state of Wisconsin. Yuri, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with what's happening in the US right now. There's a lot going on, from mass protests to very public feud between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. And there are even rumors that Musk got punched by Besant. That's quite the political theater. What exactly is happening across the country? Are we seeing just protest or something bigger?
Well, what we see is I would describe our word obfuscation, which means to hide something and to obscure, to take it out of plain view. And there's two things that I think this administration right now is trying to obfuscate with. Number one is Ukraine, because last night there was another deadly attack, one of the biggest attacks on Ukraine throughout this latest 3-year part of the big war invasion. The terrible war crime occurred in Ukraine, on our planet, with Russian weapons, when we could have done something in the United States about it, and instead we elected, And so that has to be acknowledged. And I want to send my deep condolences and support and sympathy, and just my heart goes out to all the people of Ukraine who have to watch our political theater, knowing in part that we're not talking about Ukraine. We're not talking about real evil that is taking place there. The other thing that is being obfuscated is the big, beautiful bill, which Donald Trump has pushed through House of Representatives and is now looking to push through the Senate with his own self-imposed deadline of July 4th. And that will lead, that it's a battle that Republicans feel like they cannot lose, but at the same time, it looks like they might pay a terrible price if they do win, because it's going to be very unpopular legislation, because besides things that Trump wants in it, tax cuts and so on, it also has a lot of cuts to social programs, which is going to lead to a lot of bad consequences, or so our Republican or congressmen are concerned, and senators as well. And it's a big bill, which is something that has to be balanced between the interests of even Republicans from all over the country. It's a big mess. So it's much easier for Donald Trump, as always, to talk about some scandal or some crisis that he has manufactured, rather than about his actual plans of what he's trying to do. Okay, I got it. Now, what are we actually, the day-to-day stuff of what is going on in front of the curtain? In front of the curtain, we see that Donald Trump and Elon Musk had a major falling out, and I think it is really important and telling at that point to acknowledge that money doesn't rule the world. Money doesn't win the day. It's not about the money, because who has the most money? Elon Musk. And who is in charge here? Not Elon Musk. He thought that when he paid for election of Donald Trump, that he's going to own Donald Trump, and Donald Trump was going to do everything that he wanted to. And it's not like Donald Trump doesn't believe in doing things this way. He perfectly is okay with this approach. It's just that he had a falling out, and now this machine of the state power is going to come crashing on poor Elon Musk, who kind of deserved it. But now we see wonderful conversations about how NASA all of a sudden realized that we are so dependent on one supplier who is, I don't know, heavily addicted to powerful drugs, and in a moment of feud with the President of the United States, can announce that he's going to decommission a spaceship Dragon that NASA uses to deliver goods to International Space Station. So wait a minute, our only taxi cab is going out of commission? How could we get here? I don't know. I mean, he kind of, runs the show, paid for the president. What do you want? So I think that falling out here is interesting, and in showing who has the power. Donald Trump is perfectly willing to sacrifice Mars, sacrifice a space program, sacrifice lots of different things, as long as he individually, specifically, and his family have what they need, and he can exact revenge. And as long as he can exact revenge, well, the rest can wait. And Elon Musk is falling into this usual supplier's problem, where he thinks, oh, I'm doing something so valuable. Without me, they'll never be able to get this task, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, accomplished, not realizing that it's not about getting the task done. It's about power. It's about revenge. And that's how this administration is planning on conducting its business for the foreseeable future. And that's what takes us to Los Angeles, where we see that the United States could be on the verge of a civil war if president is allowed to have his way, because he appears to have appeared like when he sees immigration agents that are going upon his orders. Actually, Stephen Miller's probably orders more directly, because they have this quota now of having to have 1,000,000 deportations a year. And this is self-inflicted riots, basically, because when you're going to go to places where people get their jobs, to home supply stores, Home Depot, and you get people off the streets who are hanging out there looking for a job, because that's where people with no documentation and want to work, and there's work for them, clearly. This is a marketplace that they show up and they start, arresting people. And yes, it over time, it led to some kind of disturbance and riots. And if there's crimes, they have to be persecuted. But it's important to acknowledge, maybe not important, but just kind of a telling point, that 5 years ago, Los Angeles Lakers won NBA championship at the height of COVID. And there were riots in Los Angeles because they were celebrating Lakers. There were 76 arrests, to the point that Donald Trump decided to engage National Guard and then possibly, the Navy SEALs. There were 42 arrests in Los Angeles. So the standards have changed, and God forbid they win championship again. So this is another thing where the policy and desire to create reality attempts at controlling everything. But we see what's going on. And this is what's interesting, Vladislav, because a lot of my viewers are in Ukraine and in Russia and in Eastern Europe. And it is people who speak Russian all over the world. And they know this story. They have seen this before. They say, oh, this is like Russia with Berezovsky. Sure, yeah. Well, didn't Elon Musk know what he was getting himself into? You sponsor a powerful guy like Putin, who was sponsored by Berezovsky in Russia. And then Putin becomes president. Berezovsky thinks he's running the show, but actually he gets pushed out of the country. And a few years later, he's found hung. And is Elon Musk aware of this? Why isn't he thinking of, like, every Ukrainian know this story? It's like a storybook, Berezovsky, Putin, how he came to power. But not learning the lessons. We don't know that story so much in America. Or, for instance, the story of Yanukovych, who was trying to do Putin's bidding in Russia and in Ukraine, and then ended up actually running away to Russia. And I think that that is still one of the possible scenarios for either Elon Musk, who was already offered a political asylum in Russia, or perhaps for Donald Trump himself, because the kind of stuff he's doing, there are more and more people who are starting to wonder who he's working for.
Okay, let's try diving into this topic. Speaking of this protest, they seem intense and emotional. Some people worry they might escalate into something much bigger. Could this demonstration grow into major nationwide unrest? And what triggered them in the first place?
It is very important who we have at the wheel at the moment of crisis, because any fire like this can be burning brighter, or it can be put out or attempted to put out. When we have President Trump, we have somebody who always throws gasoline on every fire. It's like an addiction. He can't pass by a fire without throwing some gasoline on it. And in this situation, it's like a textbook idea of how to grab power in the country. This is a dictatorship 101. Well, there are people who offer an idea that what Trump is doing right now is he's moving the so-called Overton window of what's considered acceptable, because he's normalizing these violent protests, and it's reminding people of the BLM movement, which at least in Russian language community is like nearly 100% derided because it's viewed as violence and it is viewed as, well, black people. Russians are generally, racist. So besides that, Trump would like to have this grow into something huge. If this could grow into civil war, I think he could get a medal from Putin. But I think that there's really, this is where it's important to acknowledge Governor Newsom of California, who spoke and made an announcement saying, telling to his residents, don't let them make a show out of this. Don't play into their hands, because this is a provocation. It is a very, a standard setup provocation that everybody can see it. And yet Donald Trump is just like, oh, no, look, now we have to send in the troops. And people are just like, no, no. But this is what Trumpism is about. It's denying reality. It's saying 2 + 2 equals whatever Donald Trump says it equals today. So people are not interested in violent resistance and all of this kind of stuff. People just want to live their life. They want to have their country back. And whether that is even possible is a big open question, because some would argue that America that we've had before is gone. This is a new country with a new form of government, with new realities, and the sooner we can adjust and assimilate to this new reality, the more successful people are going to be. Because if we live by the standards of, there's laws and, laws are still good, but we have a president who adopted the Russian model of, for my friends, everything, and for enemies, the law. This kind of an approach, it's very corrosive, it's corruptive, and it's destructive. And society has to adjust to it, because we are not there yet. We're heavily armed. And this is something that my Ukrainian viewers point to all the time. They say, Yuri, this could not happen. How can this be happening in America? How can there be a tyrant when people are so heavily armed? And I say, well, part of the problem is that most of the weapons are owned, I would imagine, by Trump supporters. Although there's a general kind of rearmament of the population, and it doesn't take too many bullets to kill a person, but most of the weapons, most of the firearms, if you look at them, they belong to Trump supporters to begin with. Because when they said that they were going to fight for their freedom, they really were just going to fight for the dictator. That's what apparently their end goal was. All of that talk about Tea Party and freedom loving, they just really want to stand by their Führer. That is very disappointing. It's very disappointing as an American, because even Tea Party used to be like better, I think stand for even slightly better things. Although this is a big slippery slope. Will this lead to civil war? I think that if Donald Trump has his way, it just might. How? Well, he can bring in National Guard and put people of state of California against the residents of state of California. Or he could bring in the Navy SEALs and put a military against the population of the United States. All of those tools are apparently some levers of power. He has levers he can use to pressure Putin. No. He instead is using levers to pressure Americans into what? Submission? Into saying that Donald Trump is forever king. Would you please get reelected again and again? And by the way, there's a parade coming up, and that is the most ridiculous thing that we have seen in America since the last time Donald Trump opened his mouth. Because now they're allowing money in the budget, like $14 million, I saw a number, to repair the streets in front of what, White House? Where because we are not made for parades. We're not some Red Square, and we're not China, Tiananmen Square, wherever they take. We United States, we have, they picked the wrong country. And Americans are not buying this idea. That's why the protests on June 14th are titled No King's Day. Because if there's anything that I think Americans should be able to get united behind, is that we ain't going to have a king. And I think that that's something that can bring Americans together. And then, a little bit of dignity, a little bit of honor. Who knows where it could lead.
And while the US is focused on its own problem, it feels like Ukraine is being forgotten. Trump is now sending weapons to the Middle East and says Ukraine and Russia should keep fighting for a bit longer. So, is Trump still on Ukraine's side, or is he walking away?
I think if you told Trump that he was asked him, said, you are still on Ukraine's side, he'll probably say, and Russia's too, because I'm in negotiations, because you have to be with both. Because whenever he hears word Ukraine, he always has to add word Russia. Because, you know, he just wants to have good relations with Putin. It's just diplomacy. That's why he could put sanctions on or tariffs on Ukraine, but no tariffs on Russia. A friend of mine, his church in, I think, New Jersey, maybe New York, ordered Ukrainian bells for their church. And now they have to pay a tariff of $10,000 for these church bells because they were made in Ukraine, and then now there's a 10% tariff. You know, and it's a little bit insane, and it's a little bit reality. And you can say it's lack of common sense. You can say it's madness, or you can say it's policy. Because if Ukraine gets hurt in the process, what's the goal here for the Trump administration? Peace, right? On Putin's terms, right? So it's kind of like a Russian world peace. So that means that Ukraine just has to kind of get beaten up a little bit so that Ukraine understands that it's so much smaller, so much weaker, and it has to take in whatever Russia gives it. It's a big problem because Ukraine is not going to do that. And actually, right now, Ukraine is badly needed by Europe. Because if NATO is in a sad state of affairs that it is in, and the United States can no longer be counted on to defend reliably our allies in Europe, I don't know, starting with Denmark, who we're trying to take Greenland from. So that means Europe needs to defend itself. How is it planning on defending itself? With what army? Oh, wait a minute. There is an army. There is a Ukrainian army that could actually be hugely helpful to Ukraine in defending Europe. And that's what I think another thing that Trump is trying to obfuscate is how crucially important Ukraine is for European safety. Because if he's trying to say, oh, you know, we're kind of sort of here, we're going to kind of help you, but we also want to have good relations with Putin, and let's get rid of Ukraine. It's trying to mislead people and obfuscate reality. Once again, reality is not what Donald Trump says. That's why he keeps running into problems. That's why it looks so weird, because we see something that doesn't make sense. He says it should make sense. And in the end, we just have this kind of a mess that he's trying to say, forget about Ukraine. Let's pay attention to the riots in Los Angeles. And if that's not enough, let's talk about crazy Elon Musk. And by the way, just a side note about the weapons that he's taken away, or Department of Defense reassigned from Ukraine to our troops in the Middle East. They never provided any justification for what has changed in the situation so much that now Middle East is more urgent and Ukraine is less urgent. Because if you look at the news, once again, returning to where we started, Ukraine is getting pummeled and shelled. Of course, Russia is also getting beat up pretty good. And this is where it's important to remember the spider web and other things that Ukraine is doing to really decrease Russia's ability to be a threat, frankly, which is so crucial. I mean, really, Ukraine is decreasing the Russian threat for us every day. Thank you so much, Ukraine. And the fact that Trump is trying to change and take his attention off of this, yes, he's trying to give Putin 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks. Again, people in Ukraine know this as the Arestovich model, where you're always just 2 weeks away from immediate victory, and Ukrainians are not buying. I think they kind of laugh at this joke now. So Trump doesn't look very credible to Ukrainians, but yet, you know what? People say, you know, if Trump would just help Ukraine, you'd probably support Trump. I'd be like, well, yeah. I mean, yeah, but I also know that he won't. And so this is where we are.
Mm-hmm. So we know new negotiations are expected after June 20. There's a lot of speculation around them. So what do you expect from these upcoming talks? Any real breakthroughs on the horizon?
You know, if we look at the horizon, then I will say that my expectations are from SBU. That the Ukrainian army is going to do something really incredible, spectacular right before the negotiations, and then watch Russians show up at the negotiations, wiping their nose with another great attack. Because that's what they did before, and that's, I think, what makes sense in this situation, because these negotiations are not about peace. They're about pacifying Donald Trump and his desire to have peace negotiations. He really needs peace. Why does he need peace? Because he's got business plans with Putin, and this whole Ukraine thing is just like a bone in his throat. And he really needs it to go away so he could continue with his business projects. And one way to do that, we all know, every war is going to add a negotiation table. So there's negotiation table, go sit at it. And they're sitting at it, and Trump is sitting in it. But it's just, I expect more opportunities, more amazing strikes by Ukraine, and I just expect Putin to be a little bit fearful, or more than a little fearful. Depends on how much information he was actually given in his news briefing. Maybe he was told that, all of this is fake news, and the evil Western media just created this attack using artificial intelligence, and all the planes are safely tucked away under Putin's bed. I don't know. But if he actually understands reality to any extent, he should be very nervous about the upcoming negotiations. I mean, he only has so much, stuff to lose, but it's a big country.
And here's the bigger question everyone asking. With everything that's happening, do you think Trump, Putin and Zelensky could actually meet in person after June 20? Is that scenario realistic?
Possibly at one of their funerals. Hopefully Putin's, because I think that this is one of those the boats where that there's an old story about how do you transport a wolf, a head of lettuce, and a sheep in a boat to an island when you can only take two. One of those things is not like the other. And Trump doesn't want Zelensky anywhere near when he's going to be kissing Putin's ass, so that he doesn't want witnesses to that. And Putin, frankly, doesn't want Zelensky to see when he's going to be blowing smoke up Trump's butt. So I think they both have reasons why they don't want any witnesses, not to mention that Putin doesn't even consider Zelensky to be a legitimate leader, and I don't know why we should consider Putin to be a legitimate leader. So why, I think Zelensky and perhaps they could all meet in Hague. That would be lovely. If they could all meet in international court, let's take the funeral out of this. Let's be more optimistic. Let's imagine Trump and Putin on the bench, as a defendants here, and Zelensky giving testimony. I think that would be one way that those three could find themselves in one room. Or it could be, classic joke, Zelensky, Trump, and Putin walk into a bar. Write in comments how you think that conversation, how that joke should end. Write your favorite ending. But it's impossible to imagine those three men in the same room in real life. Of course, Trump might say that such meeting has already occurred and he already won all the victories. And, Jesus would have never been crucified if Trump was president. But that's a reality that Donald Trump lives in. It's just amazing.
Thank you, Yuri, for joining us. It was a real pleasure to see you and hear your perspective. We truly appreciate your insight and analysis.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine.